Welcome to the Responsible Negotiation Podcast, produced by the DC Mediation and Dispute Resolution Institute. I am your host, Francis Ojok. Here at the Institute, we prevent, manage, resolve, and transform conflict into an opportunity for positive change using mediation and other appropriate dispute resolution mechanisms. Visit our website to learn more or contact us at info@dcmediationinstitute.com and let us know how we can work with you or collaborate with you. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me this afternoon and morning, depending on where you are in the country. Whatever time zone you're attending from, I want to thank Francis again for allowing me to host this month's webinar. I am Hershania Brown, and I hope to share some very insightful and thought-provoking information about the essential work of an ombuds and our role in fostering a safe workplace. If you follow me on LinkedIn, then you know that I occasionally post about workplace bullying and retaliation and its effects on mental health and wellness, and often tie them back to dispute resolution tips. I've also shared a bit about my own journey throughout my career and found there are countless others who have similar experiences. Instead of staying bitter and angry, which is one of the natural emotions that you feel when you're going through a lot in corporate America, or even personally, when you're going through a lot of adversity, instead of staying bitter and angry, I researched holistic practices for healing from trauma and how to bring awareness to this epidemic in the workplace and bridging the gap between the employee and employer. For my path, dispute resolution was the perfect answer, and I discovered the profession of an ombuds. But before we get into what an ombuds does, I want to share a bit more about why this field of alternative dispute resolution resonated with me. I experienced workplace bullying, harassment, and retaliation from now 4 separate employers, 3 of which contributed to compromising my mental health, including anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And I know that if you've been in tune with trending news and what's going on in the world, a lot of information is coming to the forefront with a lot of people experiencing these issues in the workplace and not getting the support that they need from their employer. So hopefully this is a conversation, and there are many conversations with other dispute resolution professionals that will be sort of a game changer in the corporate world and in any other industry that's having this type of trend. From these traumatic circumstances, I also experienced hair loss, brain fog, insomnia, weight gain, and a host of other health issues. And as you can guess, it also contributed to my spiritual life being compromised, my social life diminishing, and my finances dwindling. In all 4 experiences, my managers were the culprit, which means they had too much control and authority over my employment. What was difficult to come to grips with is that in 3 of the 4 cases, my managers were promoted. In the other case, the manager remained in office. What's worse is I found out I was not alone, as social media is ravished with posts and articles about companies that are now being exposed for their continuous mistreatment of employees, particularly Black women. It took a while before I figured out how to transform my pain points into stepping stones. Instead of staying bitter and angry, as I said before, I researched how to bring awareness to this problem in the workplace. What I found was a dispute resolution program offered at Pepperdine University that incorporated an ombuds course. There were mediation courses, ombuds course, and an arbitration course. All 3 of those courses resonated with me very well, and I was instantly connected to the program. So as part of my divine purpose, I wanted to be a change agent as an ombuds and mediator. Knowing what an ombuds does can shed light, an organizational ombuds does, can shed light on how this role works in creating a safe space for employees and cultivating a healthy work environment. An organizational ombuds is a neutral who works within these 4 principles: confidentiality, meaning the meeting with the visitor or person who is a constituent of the organization who meets with the ombuds, such as an employee, faculty member, student, parent, board member, etc., and their conversations are maintained within the strictest of confidence, including but not limited to not maintaining records unless there is express consent from the visitor to share information or if there is a risk of imminent harm or threat to others or themselves. Neutrality, meaning that the ombuds does not advocate for one side or the other. The ombuds is there to actively listen to the visitor and be a thought partner for options towards resolution. The ombuds also does not practice providing advice or acting as a therapist, although there is certainly some overlap in that function. Informality, which means the visit is voluntary. So it is incumbent on the visitor to seek the office for support if they have an issue or concern. In addition, the organizational ombuds does not investigate circumstances surrounding the conflict, and nothing is added to the visitor's file when they speak to the ombuds independently. Independence, meaning the ombuds is hired by the organization but set apart from it. Meaning, if a visitor speaks with an ombuds and decides to explore a formal route, that conversation with the formal resource does not involve the ombuds, nor will the ombuds provide any information of the conversation that was had with the visitor, unless the visitor gives express consent. In a perfect world, the ombuds would be the first point of contact when the conflict arises, like when it's nice and fresh. And that gives the ombuds enough time to be a thought partner with the visitor to figure out what are some resources or some avenues that we can explore now before the conflict gets worse. And then the visitor is now inviting a formal resource. By that point, there's only so much that an ombuds can do once a formal resource is part of the solution that the visitor has, of course, explored. An organizational ombuds is not an office of notice, thus does not investigate, as mentioned earlier. With the informality principle, although some other types of ombuds, such as a classical or advocate ombuds, are responsible for advocating disputes. Ombuds interpret policies for visitors and influence policy changes, but they do not create policies, make executive decisions on behalf of the organization, or have voting power. And Ombuds uses a lot of coaching methods to promote self-advocacy for their visitor. They create training for departments. Well, they help to create training for departments, especially if they observe a trend that would interfere with the flow of interpersonal dynamics. They collaborate with other employee channels, and they suggest improvements for policies, as mentioned earlier, thus influencing change in the organization. The doors are open to anyone in the organization who is seeking the Ombuds services, regardless of their position in the organization. The Ombuds can speak to the other person in which the visitor is having conflict with the visitor's permission. And if the other person would like to discuss in an effort to develop methods for resolution for the conflict. Ombuds mediate informally. A lot of ombuds don't like to use the term mediation, but it's more of an informal process, and most ombuds like to say facilitate. So they facilitate most conflict between the person that came into as a visitor and the other person that they are having a conflict with. And if those people agree, then they can get to the root of their problem and identify steps for moving forward. They facilitate discussions within departments if there is a trending issue, as mentioned before, and it makes sense for the ombuds to perform an intervention with an entire group. Ombuds work with other resources in the company, as mentioned before, including formal ones, as the informal resource for employees to better understand the purpose and benefits of the departments. The ombuds provide training for departments, especially ones if there are systemic issues. And I mention this because sometimes some departments are not aware of this. But if there is a systemic trend such as bullying and discrimination or retaliation, the ombuds can definitely help support in working with that department with any policy interpretation, with any changes or, like I said, any training. They won't make the changes themselves, but they can definitely be a thought partner and share any information based off of what they have, any data that they have for visitors regarding a trending issue. Ombuds identify these issues based on visitor interaction, including systemic ones, and reports them to the highest level of leadership without sharing any identifying information to stay within the rules of confidentiality.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
What is the benefit of an organizational ombuds office? Studies show that about 70% of employees lack trust in formal resources such as HR and other channels that investigates because they advocate for the employer. Also, employees feel that HR tends to apply issues to their performance issues instead of unpacking interpersonal dynamics with the person in their department or another department that they may be having issues with. The visitor would be more willing to discuss concerns with an ombuds because it's confidential and it's informal. Hiring from outside the organization or even contracting an outsourced ombuds means that the ombuds is likely unaware of the culture and has no connection to anyone in the organization. So a visitor is unlikely to perceive bias. It would also give the ombuds a fresh place to start when benchmarking improvements for suggestions. Ombuds do coaching for self-advocacy, as mentioned before, to understand options for resolving the issues, because the main focus for self-advocacy is to give empowerment to the visitor to be able to resolve their own conflict. Because at the end of the day, once that person leaves our office and they go back into the relationship or the environment with the person they are having conflict with, they are basically having to navigate that issue from that point forward. So they're in the weeds. They are directly engaged with that person, and they need to have the confidence and the empowerment to be able to help resolve their issues with a variety of different options. And it's up to the visitor to decide which option they would choose that they think is the best for them. But ombuds can certainly help facilitate if that person, that visitor, is uncomfortable with having a conversation with the other person. They can definitely facilitate that process to reach out to the other person to see if they would be willing to have a conversation to get their perspective. But again, that will still be a confidential conversation with them as well. The ombuds is also there to listen if a person needs to unburden themselves before thinking through solutions. So we have had people come into the office where I've had visitors to where they just need a sounding board. They don't want to think through solutions, because sometimes when they're talking, they may even, while they're talking it through, they may even come up with a solution on their own. But if they are in distress and they just need someone to talk to at that particular moment, we are there. Now, again, we're not therapists. We don't service therapists because that's not our role, but there's definitely some overlap with the active listening. And then if the visitor wants to go over some other options or think things through, some pros and cons about each particular option, what an option could possibly look like, or what could happen in the future, that's definitely something that the ombuds can explore with the visitor as well. The ombuds offers insight and feedback about issues plaguing the organization through reporting that maintains confidentiality, systemic issues to leadership in an annual report. And remember, the ombuds would be aware of the issues within the department from tracking the reasons the visitors sought the ombuds office in the first place. For leadership to implement necessary changes to create a better working environment, the ombuds cannot force executives to make those changes. So hopefully they are intentional about improving their organization's culture. Remember when I mentioned collaboration on the prior slide? An ombuds can collaborate and does collaborate with HR, employee relations, ethics and compliance, etc., for further guidance to support the visitor if necessary. Also, the ombuds works with other resources to develop core competency models, such as with HR, DI initiatives, and training. And an added benefit for outsourced ombuds is that the visitors are more likely to share when they know they are meeting in a safe space virtually outside of the office that's within their control in terms of what a safe space would look like for them to discuss their concerns. But there, of course, if you're meeting inside of an office, that would be a closed office where people wouldn't see when a person is coming inside the visitor's office or when they're leaving, unless they want to have it virtually or over the phone. It depends on whatever options the ombuds office provides for their visitors to contact them.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show.
Now we know what an ombuds is and their valuable role in cultivating a healthy workplace. I'd like to mention some of the reasons why ombuds are established in the first place. Here are some interesting facts from a couple of years ago about conflict in the workplace. We have, just to read off a couple of them, companies lose over $350 billion a year due to workplace conflict. Of course, that also includes money that they set aside for insurance and litigation purposes. Replacement costs for that employee are 1.5 to 2 times the salary of that employee. You have to go through training during the search to get another candidate, go through the training, and that all includes resources being involved. And according to Gallup.com, a medium-sized organization with an average of 50,000 in salary would spend from 660,000 to 2.6 million in replacement costs. It's only been since the beginning of the pandemic that companies became focused on mental health and well-being in the workplace. But there's still more work to be done, and we're just scratching the surface. If executive leadership took more time to flush out internal conflict or building effective systems, training, and accountability measures for resolution top down, there wouldn't be a need to invest so much money into post-conflict events and transactions, such as settlements and lawsuits. Some conflicts, such as workplace bullying, a topic that I am passionate about, are far more reaching in impact, especially for those of marginalized groups. So what are examples of workplace conflict? So if you take a look at the workplace conflict, here is a list of issues that are events that happen at a work and issues that are common in the workplace. You have, again, workplace bullying. You have someone being overlooked for a promotion, poor communication within the team, unfair treatment, harassment, retaliation. These are some of the reasons, or which would say common reasons why a visitor would come into the ombuds office to seek some type of solution for how to move forward with what they are experiencing, either on their team, or it might be an interpersonal issue with someone else in a different team, in a different department. Note that this is not a complete list, but I want to make sure that I identify a few of them here, because again, a lot of these are issues that you may be aware of, that you have experienced yourself, or that you know someone who has. Imagine someone enduring one of these or a few of these simultaneously. Now imagine a person enduring most or all of them. All of these issues are what I experienced in my career and have listened to countless others share their journeys of toxic work environments. If any of these events are stressful enough, then they can very well create trauma and devastating events psychologically, emotionally, physically, financially, socially, and spiritually. These are some of the issues and concerns in which an employee feels unsafe and seeks the ombuds office. So what exactly do we mean when we speak of power and control in terms of the devastating effects of trauma in the workplace? We can talk about workplace bullying. I will give that as an example because that's one of the topics that I know that I mostly speak on. Workplace bullying is not only a topic that I am passionate about, but it's also one of the most common issues that an employee seeks the ombuds office. Workplace bullying is repetitive treatment directed towards a specific person or group of people within their working environment that is intended to inflict harm, intimidation, and or degrade that person or group of people, which is why victims are often referred to as targets. It can happen between any type of dynamic in the workplace, such as between colleagues, across departments, and supervisor and direct report relationships. To state it plainly, it is considered abusive behavior that can be considered harassment and creates a hostile working environment. Pictured on the side is the Duluth model of workplace bullying wheel, which strongly resembles the domestic abuse power and control wheel. Bullying itself, although poor behavior, is not illegal in the United States. There is work being done across several groups to push legislation for changes in the workplace. However, when it violates a protected law, such as discrimination, it becomes illegal and placed in the category of that protected law. An example would be an employee or student who suspects they are bullied because of their race, culture, religion, identity, or disability, or by a colleague or by a professor. They may speak with the ombuds initially if there is an office established within the university or that corporate environment, whatever type of organization it is. But eventually, they will speak to a formal, if it continues, they will speak to a formal channel who starts an investigation process. The person may even reach out to the ombuds during that process. As a result, that colleague, teacher, employer may retaliate. It becomes a matter of proving the discrimination, which is more difficult, especially when the bullying treatment is covert. And again, that process can be talked through with an ombuds. So since bullying is one of the common reasons why bullying and retaliation are the common reasons why people seek the ombuds, why they're having issues and concerns in the workplace. I'm going to stick with bullying because that is one of the areas that that I speak on and I work in and I have the most expertise in, so we will stick with that example. Here are some examples of workplace bullying. Some, again, you may have witnessed or experienced yourself. Insults or condescending tones, intentionally making a person feel uncomfortable in their personal space, banging on a desk or slamming things on someone's workstation. One or two of these examples may make the situation uncomfortable and even suspect. But adding several of these types of behavior in repetition towards a specific person or group makes it easier to identify and creates, again, an unsafe working environment. The physical section may seem exaggerated, but these examples actually happen in the workplace. I can confirm that I have witnessed or experienced all of these myself. Nonverbal bullying can be subtle, as previously mentioned. Here are some: micromanaging, intimidating gestures, assigning demeaning tasks. Often because it's inconspicuous, others don't pick up on the treatment or interpret it the same way. Let's take a look at a couple of these in a little bit more detail. Micromanaging is one of those tricky ones that people only see as irritating and stems from a lack of trust from their manager. However, when the behavior is geared toward a specific person or a group of people within the community, within the workplace community or within that team, then it's worth exploring as a bias. This can be anything from a person having to always check in their moments and activity or copying their manager on or lead on all emails to hand-holding or not allowing autonomy on a project or an assignment. It is demeaning, incredibly stressful, and creates anxiety, which again creates an unhealthy, toxic work environment. Retaliation is almost certain if the person reports the behavior, especially if the behavior is coming from the manager. Instead of possibly seeking coaching or counseling for the accusation, the bullies and authority exercise their power to make things very difficult for the victim or the target. And most oftentimes, if that person does not seek employment in a different department, they are fired. Unless it is blatant with substantial proof and or a witness, such as a bystander coming forward, the person with the bullying behavior is rarely held accountable. And I'm quite sure many of you that are ombuds that are watching today are working diligently to provide upward feedback in combating this problem. Let's look a little bit deeper now into the psychological and emotional aspects. Bullying is not only a mental health concern, it is traumatic. And it is an epidemic in the workplace. In other words, it compromises safety. I know I've mentioned that several times, but you're probably going to hear that a couple of more times throughout this presentation, because it is definitely worth looking at it from the light of abuse, because that's exactly what it is. Again, we've seen so many trending news lines about people that have either been targeted for retaliation, they have been fired or demoted, And in recent cases, we have seen people, and not just recent cases, it's happened across the board, but it's becoming more exposed in mainstream media that people are committing suicides and taking their own lives from the bullying and retaliation that they are experiencing in the workplace. So this is very much a very serious issue. How it affects the mind. It increases the level of stress hormones to the brain, the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, creating cognitive dysfunction, such as issues concentrating and memory loss. It contributes to anxiety, which is worrying, racing thoughts, heart palpitation, insomnia. And we all know how important sleep is for regenerating cells. It contributes to depression, loss of interest, lack of motivation, lethargy, hopelessness, sadness, thoughts of suicide. It also contributes to PTSD, which is fear, hostility, constantly agitated, and a sense of distrust from a prior rooted experience. It contributes to burnout, which can take up to 3 years to completely recover from. The mind has already gone into a fight or flight cycle, and the person is functioning at severe stress levels. Emotionally, as we know, the signals of the brain are not functioning properly once bullied, which throws off the regulation of other hormones as mentioned above. These hormones regulate mood, feeling equipped, and how a person processes circumstances, or I should say processes current circumstances, such as a pattern of thinking of impending doom, which makes it difficult to see light at the end of the tunnel, especially when the events are repeating. It's hard to get out of bed and exert energy into those spaces. From there, productivity can be impacted and it becomes a vicious cycle until it becomes a vicious cycle until one is no longer in harm's way. When a person's body is not operating in its original functioning, things get thrown off balance because everything is connected. Certain hormones, as mentioned before, regulate signals in glands, causing storage of trauma in other areas of the body, such as the gut and liver, making it harder to filter and flush out toxins. This contributes to heart attacks, hair loss, weight gains, weakened joints, and eczema flares, among other issues. Trauma causes inflammation from stress, which can lead to headaches, stress on the heart, digestive issues, hives, and rashes, as well as hair loss. It's the body's reaction to something disruptive. A compromised immune system can cause other health issues or problems fighting off illnesses. And workplace bullying causes chronic pain in joints, muscles, and tissue because stress and trauma, again, are stored in the body. Socially, if a person is depressed and having physical issues, the natural result is isolation from family, friends, and groups. They're no longer themselves, therefore their self-esteem is compromised. Talking about it may be uncomfortable because of the judgment that may surface. They may even ask themselves why they keep allowing this to happen or what they did to deserve it. Spiritually, research has shown that there are connections of trauma to the soul. Since trauma is part of one's unconscious mind, then it can also be stored in the soul, along with original emotions from that event, which is how a person gets triggered. In addition, if a person does not find healing and relief, the emotions, fears, and bias can be passed down from one generation to the next. Here are some obvious ways that an organizational ombuds can help an organization save time as related to these events. When employees are empowered to resolve their conflict, thus finding a resolution, they are more productive and efficient in their role because they feel valued, heard, and respected. By principle, an increase in productivity and efficiency means an increase in revenue for the company. It also translates into less absenteeism, health insurance claims, and short-term disability cases, as well as a reduction in claims filed with the EEOC and/or civil court for employees who are able to resolve issues of instances that have eventually violated a protective law. Finally, let's look at 2 different scenarios of reasons why an ombuds would visit an office. I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly. So here's a scenario. Joe schedules a confidential appointment to meet with the ombuds after months of his manager, Jane, dismissing his comments and feedback in team meetings and denying 2 consecutive PTO requests. And here is a list of things that are mentioned in the Ombuds meeting. While speaking with Joe, the Ombuds would ask him more questions to understand why he believes Jane is treating him unfairly. Joe would likely mention of his prior management experience and medical emergency that he had several years ago before starting with the company in a position that he is overqualified for. The Ombuds would use active listening and compassionate communication to have the discussion. What are some options to consider? What matters most to Joe? Joe states he is being disrespected and humiliated. What is Joe's main goal? Joe states that his ultimate goal is to get back on his career track in leadership, and Jane is making it difficult for him to accomplish that. What are some steps that Joe has already considered? Joe hasn't taken any additional steps because he mentioned his leadership qualities in the interview. So Jane and the other higher ups should already know to consider him for management opportunities. Now, this is what Joe is thinking. There's a lot here for the Ombuds to unpack, but knowing this information can help identify options towards resolving the conflict with Jane and any interpersonal conflict that the Ombuds identifies, such as possibly considering a lateral move, building his relationships with colleagues in other departments, taking advantage of any professional development opportunities to help him move up the corporate ladder, documenting his contributions to the department, possibly finding a mentor, and even seeking additional mental health and marriage counseling support through the company's EAP or his insurance, since as we see here, this has had a profound effect on his marriage to his wife. So the Ombuds is exploring the entire circumstance from a holistic perspective, because there could be some things from his marriage or some things externally that he's bringing into the workplace that can be contributing to his stress. The Ombuds would also explore what Joe having a conversation with Jane would look like to get a better understanding of why his PTO requests were denied and understanding policies for taking time off. The Ombuds would also encourage Joe to schedule a follow-up appointment if he needs further exploration of options. And again, that would be up to Joe to decide whether or not he would seek the Ombuds after that particular meeting. So here's part 2 of this scenario. Avery was recently promoted to director less than 4 months ago and is having a hard time managing their relationship with Jane. Yes, that Jane from the prior slide, who was a friend of theirs before they were promoted, and now Jane has become distant. So here's a list of things that are mentioned once Avery visits the Ombuds office. While speaking with Avery, the Ombuds would ask them more questions to understand their relationship with Jane before and after the promotion and how they are settling into their new role. Some of the same underlying questions would be asked, like the ones asked with Joe, to have a better understanding of Avery's interests and why they believe Joe is a strong candidate for the role. Ultimately, there would be brainstorming to explore if Avery's relationship with Jane is important enough for them to not compromise their new role and the decision Avery will make in the best interest of the department and the company, in addition to the responsibilities and demands of an executive position and how they envision themselves being successful in their new role. Obviously, the Ombuds would not share any information about Joe having been a visitor in the office. By the way, Joe makes that follow-up appointment with the Ombuds to share that Jane is becoming less and less tolerable, and he applied for a position in another department. Again, obviously, the Ombuds cannot share any information with Joe that Avery provided or that Avery provided in a prior visit with Avery as a visitor. Joe wants to know what he can do to prepare himself for his interview, which is why he is excited and nervous at the same time. The Ombuds would probably treat this as a different case if the bulk of this other decision was to prepare for the interview, if the bulk of the discussion was to prepare for the interview. And the Ombuds would explore options of what Joe could do to prepare, including helping Joe identify his skills that align with the role, possibly role playing with it in an interview, or researching possible questions that may be asked in the interview, along with any other helpful resources. So those two were not complex situations, but they are very much realistic, because you can have someone that comes into the office that may be having a concern or an issue with another person that came into your office as a visitor. And neither one of them, of course, would know that they sought the ombuds unless they mentioned it, but the ombuds would not share that information. You, of course, would have some confidential information and know the perspective that the other person is coming from, but you would treat every visitor the same in confidentiality and respect. So as you can see, an ombuds contributes to the workplace, fostering a safe environment. If one is not already established, then it may be a good idea to contact the IOA or someone, if you know an ombuds, to figure out how you can establish an office in your workplace.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certifications designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show. It is very obvious that Humbert does not only create a safe working environment, but it protects the company from liability and unproductivity, right? However, in a traditional setting, in case of any workplace disputes, people will go to the HR. Now, the question is, how does the work of an ombud differs from what HR does? And two, why ombud as opposed to HR?
Well, there are some distinctions. So HR is there to is a resource for the organization to make sure that the organization functions as it should internally. There aren't any issues from a legal standpoint in terms of employment disputes or employment issues, or an employee, as I mentioned before, feeling like a protected law has been violated, such as racism in the workplace. They have policies there to help guide and training for their teams. I don't have expertise as someone in HR. So someone from HR who may be watching can probably give you more information, but they are there basically for the internal operations of the organization. Any policies, to guide through any policies for the employees as it relates to their employment with the employer. The ombuds would be that informal resource. So as I mentioned before, a person would come into the ombuds office or seek the ombuds voluntarily. Like an ombuds is not going to go to a person and say, you know what, I see that you're having a hard time. Why don't you step into my office so that we can talk? They're not going to do that. They will have the outreach, obviously, so that everyone in the organization will know that they are there to provide support from that perspective. There is, to me, a lot of overlap between a therapist. So a person can go into HR and say, listen, I'm having this issue. There is nothing that's preventing HR from having personal relationships with anyone in the organization. Now, whether or not they believe that's a good idea is something separate. For an ombuds normally don't do that. They will have a relationship with each other within the office, because within your ombuds office, you're holding very highly confidential information. But you're probably not going to see an ombuds hang out with someone from HR or someone from a different department during lunch. Like, you may have, if they have a friendship, say for instance, if they were already friends before that person was established in that ombuds role, that would be between them to make sure that they don't give a certain perspective of how that would look from anyone else in the organization if they see them out together. But an ombuds, if you come in, if a visitor comes in and speaks to an ombuds, we're going to write down notes so that we can have some information to help guide you through the process, or have any questions, just to get an understanding of, get to the root of the problem, or what direction that visitor would like to go. But those notes are getting shredded. No ombuds do not retain any records. And they're not going to give that information to HR or someone else for them to further investigate. If HR investigates, that would be because the visitor sought them as a resource for their their conflict to do for them to do whatever it is that they feel that they need to do that would be in the best interest of the organization.
For somebody watching who might be interested in doing Ombuds work, how can one become an Ombud?
No, that's a good question. The first thing that I would do is go onto the International Ombuds Association's website. And if you heard me mention everybody who's in the ombuds world, we call that association the IOA. If you go on their website, they have a lot of information and resources on what you can do to become an ombuds. There are some there's definitely a lot of training. If you become a membership, a member, you have access to the resources, a lot of like a wealth of resources as a member. I would also look into like colleges or universities that have some type of dispute resolution program like I did that has a course, an ombuds course. Also, I would connect with people on LinkedIn who are ombuds, do a search for ombuds and just kind of connect with them to maybe pick their brain on how they became an ombuds, because they're different types of ombuds from different sectors. So you may have some that do some things a little bit different. You would probably get some information from people in different sectors to determine which one you would like to be, and they can help guide you through that process or share some other resources for you to contact, and maybe some skills and training. Like I said, through the IOA would be a plus.
Thank you so very much. You have stated that the conversation between an ombuds and a client is confidential. Now, what are the circumstances under which that confidentiality can be foregone with?
So when a visitor comes into the office, if the ombuds can, well, one, if the ombuds gets direct consent from the visitor that they can share information. And sometimes the visitor can say, yeah, I need support with you contacting this office, share only this information. Or they may even say, no, I don't want you to share anything. So that would be one way that that particular bit of confidentiality, or if they are okay with sharing an entire conversation, would be broken. If the ombuds can detect imminent risk of harm or threat to themselves or others. So if someone is in distress and they come in and they have been dealing with depression and they are having suicidal ideations, or you can kind of tell if you're asking certain questions just by their demeanor, their body language. And if they go into more detail about what they are experiencing, any emotional hurt or pain, then you're going to start asking some questions. If they're saying, yes, I have had suicidal thoughts, or, this person I'm experiencing bullying, I have had thoughts of doing harm towards them, then you got to break confidentiality at that point. And they are with you through that process. It was not like, when they leave, you're calling people. While they are sitting there, you are going through that process to contact the appropriate channels for that.
Wow, this is truly amazing. My takeaway from your presentation is, for an employee who want a listening ear, you can go to an Ombuds who will give you the listening ear. If you're not sure which direction to take, you can go to an Ombuds, and an Ombuds will direct you to, where you can go to, for example, file complaint if you have a complaint. If a company is unsure of whether the policy is working, they can benefit from an Ombuds services in, looking at the policies and coming up with a more inclusive and robust policies.
Yes. And I want to mention too that if you have human resources or employee relations, and again, they complement each other. They complement the ombuds office. They have different functions. If a visitor goes and talks to one of those resources and decides to move forward with like a complaint, they can still see the ombuds. It's just that the options are kind of limited at that point, because you have to allow that formal resource to do whatever their role is in that process. So it might be to where you're just discussing, how you feel about it, once you went and saw HR or the complaint process. You're kind of limited. It's not to say that you don't have options, but you would definitely have more options if you're exploring how do we resolve this conflict at the beginning while it's ripe, and not instead of it getting going through a darker path of anger and retaliation or something else that's compromising your mental wellness.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so very much for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. I hope when we reach out again to invite you to come and share your wisdom with us, you will be kind enough to again grace us with your time and your wisdom.
Thank you. I definitely will. And thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so very much. Please have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You do the same. Take care.
All right. Bye. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can support us by leaving a 5-star review. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast to stay informed whenever we upload a new episode. See you in the next episode.